Have you ever started a project when you think, that'll only take 2 weeks, I'll do that in a day, 5-minute job. It's just 4 sides, the top and the bottom, won't take long at all. And then when you get started, you realise you pay so much attention to detail, it's gonna take forever. Well, that's what happened in this video. A guy at work said to me he wanted a custom toy box made for his son. He wanted it bigger than the ones you could buy on the shelves. He wanted a nice thick wooden top. He wanted his son's initial on the front. Easy. In my mind, this was going to take me maybe a month. In reality, 6 months. 6 months. I was really pleased with the way it turned out. But the journey to get there took a long time. Anyway, enough waffle. Let's show you how I did it.
I started off cutting the finger safe gap on the front board. This would stop any small fingers getting trapped by the lid. I cut 2 holes at each end of the board, rounded off the corner with a jigsaw, and then used my table saw to cut a nice straight edge between the 2 holes. It's worth pointing out these boards are 18mm plywood and I got them pre-cut from my local hardware store. I use an iron-on edge banding to cover the cut edges of this plywood and give it a nice finish. And when I put this on, I like to have a look at the underside of the strip to make sure the glue's melting before I move on to the next section. But it wasn't until I looked back at the footage that I realised when I do this, I look, well, kind of stupid. Any surfaces that I couldn't get the iron on, I used a heat gun to melt the glue and then use an off-cut of a piece of pipe to smooth it down. So this project was a perfect opportunity to make use of my new pocket hole jig, and it seemed to work quite well. I took diagonal measurements of the box, made sure these were the same, and that made sure the box was square before I screwed the base into place. And once that was in place, I drilled pilot holes, countersunk the head, and then put screws in place to hold it together.
So the future owner of this toy box wanted the lid to be really thick, so I'm going to laminate 2 bits of plywood together and then put some edge banding around the edge to make it look like one solid lump of wood.
So at this point I'd ideally use lots of clamps around the edge to hold this together, but I don't have enough. So I just used the toy box itself with everything heavy piled on top and gravity to squeeze it all together, which worked quite well. Next problem was this edge was not that clean and I need to put edge banding on. So I run the long side through my table saw just to shave a millimetre off and give me a nice clean edge, and the short edge I just use a sander to level it off. So when it came to trimming off the edges, you can get these fancy trimmers, which again I didn't have. So a piece of scrap paper and a blade worked really well. And then I sanded the rest back with some fine grit sandpaper. I use an offcut from a piece of door frame to act as a skirting board to go around the bottom of the box. It just protected it from any knocks or bumps.
When it came to selecting hinges for the lid, I didn't want anything that drilled into the end grain because there's a lot of weight on the lid that could force the grain open of the plywood. I went with like a kitchen cabinet door. The beauty of these is that they both screw into the side grain? Yeah, side grain. And we give a nice strong action mechanism. Whatever.
And it's at this point where I had a near disaster and nearly lost hours and hours of work.
To drill the holes for the hinges, I got this 35mm bit, like a Forstner bit, that's specifically for door hinges. Bravery test.
Another thing I learned about myself when watching this footage back is just how much I grunt when I have to use any physical effort. It was around about this point when my camera stopped recording, so you can't see me do it, but I put these soft close hinges in place just to cushion the closing of the lid. Next thing to do was to dismantle everything and take it for painting. Now I decided to do that in my house because the shed was pretty dusty and I wanted to get a good finish. Now the whole controversial part about this toy box is the colours that was used. I quite like the grey on the body, but the dark grey around the edge I didn't really like and very nearly changed it. But the future owners of the toy box said they liked it, so I stuck with it and it actually grew on me after a while. So for the lid I used a sanding sealer to stop the stain from soaking in. I use a combined varnish and stain, and you can very easily get brush strokes if you're not careful. So this sealed everything off to give a really nice finish. And I'll put links in the description of everything that I used here. You may have guessed that the toy box's new owner has a name that begins with the letter H, and his parents wanted a H on the front of the toy box, so I stuck this onto a piece of MDF and cut it out with a jigsaw, then used some sandpaper just to smooth off any rough edges. I then used a rotary tool to get into any tough angles and corners that I couldn't get by hand, and then I used a router to put a nice chamfered edge all the way around. And by the magic of editing, this was all of a sudden painted, the same colours as used on the main toy box. So to fix this all together, I clamped everything in place, drilled some pilot holes in the back, and then screwed from behind so you wouldn't actually see any of the screws. Did the same thing by putting this H onto the front of the toy box. I could have just painted the inside of the toy box, but I don't like to do things by half measures, and I thought it'd look really good to have a nice material lining on the inside. So I cut off these small pieces of fiberboard, cut around any brackets, and covered them with this vinyl material. And it's actually tablecloth, which I got from a local homeware store. I then used some spray glue, contact adhesive on the boards and the fabric, and stuck them down. And to help smooth out any gaps there, I used just a rolled up towel to push everything out. So for the base, I stuck this covering directly down. I could have done this on the sides as well, but I wouldn't have got a clean edge along the top, and I wanted it to have a really nice finish. So the base was fine, but on the side panels, overlapping them over a board gave me the best finish there possible. And it's worth saying that this spray adhesive is really sticky stuff, so I had a few mishaps where a piece of spray glue went over the sides, and it took me ages to clean off. And once these boards were covered, I screwed them in place using these upholstery cups and a screw. Again, I'll put links below for anyone who wants to buy them. And the finishing touch was an engraved plate to show who made it.
I'm pleased I was able to show you that in much less time than it took me. If you are a regular to my channel, and you will notice I don't put videos out that regularly, normally because they take 6 months to make, you can support me by giving me a thumbs up, subscribing if you're not, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.